What happens when we die? This may be the most intriguing question of all time, and it is a question that everyone has asked themselves, but no one knows the answer for sure. After all, no one who has been on the other side and returned can tell us exactly what happens after we close our eyes for the last time. But what if I told you that there is a way for us to discover at least some clues to this mystery, and that it might be partially possible thanks to some people who have been dangerously close to that thin line that separates life and death, and somehow managed to remain among us? In today's video, we will try to decipher near-death experiences. This name, often abbreviated as NDE, emerged in the studies of the French psychologist Victor Egger in the 1800s, but it was only in 1975 that the topic gained worldwide popularity. It was in that year that the American psychiatrist Raymond Mood released the book Life After Life. This book burst the academic bubble and became an international bestseller, becoming one of the main references for scholars on this subject. But before we delve into near-death experiences, we first need to ask ourselves what exactly almost dying means. In the legal sense, death is brain death, but various near-death experiences seem to be associated with cases where people experience an imminent risk of dying, such as when they stop breathing or their heart stops beating, or blood circulation ceases. In the past, in various moments, this was an irreversible situation, but thanks to technological advances, such as defibrillators and cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers, there are people who can reverse the situation. And it is during these seconds or even minutes that some people live the so-called near-death experiences. The reports about what exactly happens during these experiences vary a bit, but there are some patterns. In the book Life After Life, the author gathered about 150 testimonies and came up with a list of 9 points that seem to be common to almost all cases. First, patients report an intense buzzing in the ears. Then, a feeling of peace and absence of pain. Next is the experience of being outside one's own body, followed by entering a tunnel and ascending or levitating. The experience of seeing deceased people and encountering spiritual beings is also described, along with reviewing moments of one's own life. Finally, some patients report the existence of a door or some other physical limit, like a lake, and if the person crosses it, they will no longer be able to return to material existence here on Earth. Some have even recorded on a canvas what they saw during a near-death experience. This was the case of the British artist Shiv Gurewal, who was clinically dead for 7 minutes. He painted pictures of what he remembers from that moment. You might even be thinking that this sounds like something someone who used illicit substances would say. However, a study was conducted precisely to compare these cases. Researchers from Johns Hopkins University in the United States divided more than 3,000 people into 2 groups, one who had an NDE without using any chemical substances and another with people who had psychedelic experiences using drugs. The results showed that there are indeed some similarities in both groups. Most participants reported having a revelation about the meaning of life and a reduction in the fear of death. However, for those who had an NDE, the experience was shorter, lasting less than 5 minutes. But, in fact, there are other reports long before that. The first record of something similar to an NDE is in a text by Plato, the Greek philosopher who lived 400 years before the Common Era. In the 10th book of his work The Republic, he mentions the story of a soldier who was declared dead on a battlefield but returned to life and spoke about what he saw beyond. The scene he described was a kind of judgment. People who had already died heard their final sentences to know where they would go from that moment on. The most frequent and famous current reports are from people who face some complication while undergoing surgery. For example, they leave their own bodies and can look at themselves as spectators. Let's analyze 3 cases that have already been reported, telling experiences similar to this. All these cases were documented by the University of Virginia in the United States. The first is Laura Gaines, who was 12 years old when she needed to have her tonsils removed. She reported that during the operation, she saw her own body surrounded by a doctor and 2 nurses, who seemed very concerned. She then left the operating room and went to look for her mother, who was no longer in the waiting room. Her mother had taken the chair from the waiting room to a hallway in the hospital. After the surgery, she asked her mother why she had moved the chair, and the mother was somewhat surprised by the question, as the girl had no other way of knowing that had happened. Another case is Al Sullivan. After surgery to place a coronary artery bypass graft, he said he watched his own surgery from above, and a gesture from the surgeon caught his attention. He said the doctor moved his arms in a curious way, as if trying to flap wings. After the surgery, the doctor explained that, to avoid touching contaminated surfaces, he chose to touch his hands to his chest and use his elbows to point and give instructions to the team. The account caused astonishment since the patient would have no way of seeing this during the surgery. Finally, one of the most famous cases of NDE ever documented is that of the singer Pam Reynolds. She had a brain aneurysm, and to try to save her life, doctors had to slow down her body, leaving her clinically dead for a few moments to drain blood from the singer's brain. Her body dropped to 10 degrees Celsius, and her heart stopped beating. All of this was monitored by the doctors who successfully conducted the surgery. When she returned from sedation, she surprised the team with an extremely detailed account of the instruments they used and even the conversations. It is important to note that the entire environment was being controlled, and the medical team ensures that the patient was clinically dead. One of the leading names in this type of research is Professor Sam Parnia, who is the Director of Intensive Care and Resuscitation Research at the New York University School of Medicine. He says that since the development of cardiopulmonary resuscitation techniques, death is no longer an absolute state but rather a process that can be reversed in some people even after it has started. Parnia explains that when the brain stops receiving oxygen, irreversible damage to brain cells does not occur in a few minutes. This actually takes hours, and it is during this interval that patients experience near-death experiences. A study conducted by him monitored the brain activity of 567 patients who had cardiac arrest. All underwent cardiopulmonary resuscitation maneuvers, and in some cases, the analysis found brain activity even when the patient's hearts were not beating and blood was not circulating. Gamma, delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves were detected. These are the 5 types of brain waves that act at different frequencies and are responsible for everything we think or feel. In other words, this would be evidence that our brain can continue to function even when we are technically dead. But everything in science is subject to a second opinion, and this study was no different. One of the world's leading experts in NDE, Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia, Bruce Grayson, criticized the supposed results of the research. He said that this study on persistent brain waves after cardiac arrest was exaggerated by the media, and the researcher Parnia's team did not show any associations between brain waves and conscious activity. Despite this criticism, Bruce Grayson defends the truth of near-death experiences. The main theory he studies is that of the independence between mind and brain, that is, our consciousness is not necessarily only in our brain. A suitable model of mind-brain interactions must be able to explain how consciousness can function so complexly during an NDE, noting that the act of thinking, sensory perception, and memory continue to occur during cardiac arrest or under general anesthesia. Current physiological models that explains how the mind works consider such events impossible. Grayson compares this situation to the development of quantum physics. An analogy can be established with Newtonian mechanics, which seems to explain the physics of everyday life. It was only with the investigation of extraordinary circumstances involving extremely small or large distances, speeds, or masses that revealed the limits of the Newtonian model and the need to develop additional explanatory models. This also applies to the question of understanding the mind-brain relationship. The exploration of extraordinary circumstances such as an NDE can reveal the limitations of this current understanding model, and the need to develop a more comprehensive explanatory model. In other words, it is often the questioning of something that seems natural that makes science progress. Grayson also lists a series of non-explanations for NDEs. He says that contrary to what many people may think, experiences are not tied to a specific person profile. In other words, Patients are psychologically healthy individuals who do not distinguish themselves in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, religion, or mental health. One hypothesis is that NDEs would be a product of people's imagination based on what they expect regarding death, but Grayson also rejects this version. He emphasizes that young children with few expectations about death have experiences similar to those of adults, and there are cases of people who had experiences completely opposite to their personal and religious beliefs. There is also the assumption that near-death experiences are caused by anoxia or hypoxia, that is, the lack of oxygen in the body. But the researcher contests this, arguing that comparisons made with cases of fighter pilots who also experience loss of consciousness due to lack of oxygen show very different reports, and moreover, patients who undergo NDE do not have the same symptoms as those suffering from anoxia or hypoxia, such as seizures, memory loss, disorientation. Another hypothesis that the study rules out is hallucinations caused by medications, because near-death experiences are even less frequent in patients receiving drugs. So, as I hope it has become clear up to this point, there are more questions than answers on this subject, and humanity is far from fully deciphering everything that involves these experiences. Different research has managed to understand certain aspects of near-death experiences, but none of them has completely unraveled how they occur, and it is possible that this may never happen. The most likely scenario is that the discovery of what awaits us after death will remain eternally a mystery, but ironically will be solved by everyone as soon as our turn comes. If you have had any similar experiences, leave them in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. Until next time.